I had a visitor come by the shop last week and he's looking around going, "Where is your drill press?" And I was like, "I don't have one." And he just stared at me like I told him I don't wear deodorant or something. So we got to talking about all the tools that apparently every woodworker is supposed to have. And I realized that I don't have some of them. So today I'm gonna walk you through which tools home hobbyist furniture makers don't really need and what to do instead, because you can save space, money, and time by skipping some of the unnecessary stuff. One of the first machines I got when building out my first shop was a drill press. It was this 80-year-old beaver that weighed as much as a small car, and it had about the same gas mileage. I got it for cheap and I spent a weekend rebuilding it with new bearings and stuff. And for a while, I actually used it. I'd hog out waste for mortises with large Forstner bits. I'd drill really accurate holes when I needed them perfectly perpendicular. And it was also great for drilling holes in metal like steel. But when I really thought about it, I almost never needed holes that were perfectly perpendicular. I'd like doing mortises with a plunge router better, and steel, well, it just didn't really come up very often for me. So this machine that takes up a decent chunk of floor space was basically just sitting there collecting sawdust while I worked around it. And at that point, I realized I'd rather just use that space for storage for other tools I used more often, more than twice a year. So I got rid of the drill press. Here's what I use instead. When I got rid of my drill press, I picked up a drill guide jig that turns your cordless drill into a more precise tool. I do a lot of dowel joinery. I prefer using a good dowel jig over doing dowels on a drill press. And for something like shelf pin holes, you can also buy a jig. I made one out of plywood for a plunge router, but you can also use ones for drills as well. Now, if you're drilling tons of precise holes all the time, then a drill press definitely makes sense. But the real question is, are you actually drilling enough precise holes to justify dedicating permanent floor space to a machine? For me, making one-off furniture, it turns out the answer was no. So if you're just starting out and everyone's telling you that you need a drill press, then maybe save the money, maybe save the space, and put that square footage towards something that you'll actually use. And if you already have one collecting dust, maybe ask yourself if it's earning its keep. Speaking of that drill guide, I kind of panicked and I went out and bought a top-of-the-line woodpecker's one that cost me an embarrassingly large amount of money for it. And where does it sit now? In the box that it came in. I have a pattern with machine sanders. I buy one, I use it very little, and then I sell it. It's like I'm using Facebook Marketplace like a very inefficient rental service. My first was a Wen benchtop belt and disc sander. I used it for one project and I immediately sold it. And then I lowballed someone on Facebook Marketplace and scored the smallest, the most beat up edge sander ever made for less than 200 bucks. It had been through the ringer in some industrial shop, but I spent a weekend changing all the bearings and all a bunch of stuff. The same story as the drill press. I rebuilt the whole thing, I used it a little bit, and then I got rid of it. While I had it though, that edge sander was actually very useful. When I needed to fair out a large curve or flush up two mating surfaces, it was excellent. The problem was that it had a huge footprint. For something that I really didn't use on every project, it was pretty hard to justify. Now, if you're building kitchen cabinets with 40 drawer fronts that all need to fit perfectly, an edge sander makes total sense. Sneaking up on those exact fits, you can sand assemble drawer boxes flush. Yeah, that's what these things excel at. And if that's you, these machines are absolutely worth the space. But I build standalone furniture, one-off pieces from my single-car garage, not production cabinetry. So when I got rid of the edge sander, I thought one of those 12-inch disc sanders would be the answer. It has a smaller footprint, it's still useful when needed. Well, you know how many times I used it for furniture? Basically never. Sometimes for metal hardware or making a weird jig, but it just sits in the corner reminding me I'm bad at learning lessons. Well, for me and what I do in here, the whole premise seemed kind of wrong. People think you need big machine sanders to smooth out curves and get clean edges, but for the one-off furniture I make, I found better ways. For curves, I like to use spoke shaves now. I find them faster, more controlled, and way more accurate. They were just remove the high spots instead of just blasting the whole thing with grit and hoping for the best. For multiples of the same curved part, well, pattern routing lends itself very well to that. Just make one good template, you can route to it, and then you're done. What about the oscillating spindle sander? They are great at smoothing out really tight concave curves that my spoke shaves can't really get into, and also when the grain is just all weird and causing me aggravation. But honestly, those things just don't come up a whole lot for me. So I bought a handheld oscillating spindle sander. It didn't really cost a lot. It also means it's not really that great, but it does fit in a drawer. I probably used it maybe 2 or 3 times in like 18 months, but at least it's not hogging up a whole bunch of floor space. So if you already have a cheap benchtop sander that works for you and it's not really getting in your way, I see no problem keeping it. But if you have some big machine sander that's taking up half your floor space, well then maybe try a spoke shave and try pattern routing. And if those things start working for you and you're not using your big machine sanders, then maybe you can sell it and reclaim some shop space. The disc sander is still sitting over there in the corner behind you, by the way. And the second I figure out what to put there instead, it's gone. Maybe a second bandsaw? Now, before everyone loses their minds for this next tool, let me preface this by saying that I'm really trying not to gatekeep woodworking here. I'm actually trying to make your lives easier. I do not use pocket hole screws if I can help it. I do own a pocket hole jig. It's an older Craig model that I've had for years at this point, and I will probably keep using it for years more when I need to make the occasional pocket hole when I actually need one. I see no need to upgrade this thing to the latest and greatest plastic model. I made an entire video testing pocket screws, and everything I said in that video still stands now. So if you want that full breakdown, you can go watch that after this. But here is the abridged version. For me, pocket screws only make sense when I need a fast and hidden fastener. I know that sounds like I'm being Captain Obvious when I say it like that, but what drives me crazy is that I see people using pocket screws in situations where they absolutely don't need a hidden fastener, like screwing together cabinets when regular screws are eventually going to be hidden by the next adjoining cabinet on the wall. And in doing so, they're using a weaker fastener than if they just drove in a regular construction screw from the outside. Yep, you heard that right. Regular screws are stronger. I did test this. A big 2-inch construction screw from the outside of a cabinet is twice as strong as an 1.25 inch typically sized pocket screw from the inside, and it's way faster because you don't need a jig, no setup, no pocket hole drilling, and you save money by not buying more specialty screws. Now, I'm sure the engineers are watching and furiously typing right now, you shouldn't compare 2 different length screws. Sure, an 1.25 inch pocket screw is about 20% stronger than the same length construction screw, but why would you limit yourself when you can use a much longer screw from the outside? The only time pocket screws make sense to me is when the outside look actually matters and you're needing something faster than dowels, dominoes, or some other traditional joinery. Face frames for built-in cabinets, yeah, pocket holes make sense. Maybe making some quick drawer boxes? I guess so, yeah. But if you're building something where nobody's gonna see the fasteners in the end, you're just making extra work for yourself and using a weaker connection. So yeah, I have a pocket hole jig. Sometimes I use it, but if you find that you're reaching for it out of habit rather than necessity, maybe ask yourself if a regular screw would do the job better. And if you want to actually learn pocket screws the right way, plus all the better alternatives I keep mentioning, I created the Joint Academy for exactly this. It's a 7.5 hour long course that covers the 12 most important woodworking joints, from simple stuff like half flaps and dowels all the way up to the more advanced stuff like Mortise and tenons, bridle joints, joints, and dovetails. Multiple methods are shown for many joints, so you're never stuck because of tool limitations, and everything is taught with either a table saw or a router, or maybe a router table. It's designed to be a lifetime reference so you can jump to exactly what you need when you need it. No hunting through hundreds of videos on YouTube. And right now it's 30% off for the New Year's New Skills sale, because if you're gonna level up your joinery in 2026, start with the joints that'll actually last. Crosscut sleds are wonderful things. They're an inexpensive way to get seriously accurate cuts on your table saw, way better than most stock miter gauges. But somewhere along the way, we went from Norm Abrams' very simple base and a fence to absolute monstrosities with integrated hold downs with T-tracks and modular this and modular that. Things that are so big and heavy that you need a chain hoist just to get them on your dang table saw. And I'll admit, I also bought into this. I made one of those ultimate crosscut sleds that could supposedly handle everything I'd ever need. I built it huge, I added all the features, I felt great about it, but my back was not as impressed. It turns out that making one massive sled that can supposedly do everything means that you end up with something that you kind of just don't want to use. My original sled weighed over 30 pounds. That's a lot if you're like me and you break into a sweat whenever you look at a dumbbell. So I got rid of that and I made two smaller but more specialized sleds. And somehow I ended up with more capacity and less weight. When I had a serious think about what I was actually cross-cutting at my table saw, it was usually one of either two things: long narrow boards or short and wide panels. Those are completely different cuts that need completely different support. For long, narrow boards, I made this sled that's only 10 inches deep, but it goes up to 44 inches long with this stop block extension. It only weighs roughly 15 pounds. It doesn't have an unnecessary fence on the far side to save weight, and I can still cross-cut pretty long boards because they're supported along most of its length. For wide panels, I made this panel sled with the fence on the far side. It can handle panels up to 24 inches deep, and it only weighs like 10 pounds. Having the fence on the far side seems weird at first, but it means that the weight is a little bit better distributed so that the sled doesn't want to tip off the front of the saw. In stark contrast, my original ultimate sled could only handle panels up to 20 inches deep and maybe boards that were 36 inches long before things got sketchy. And it also weighed more than these two sleds combined. These give me way more capacity in both directions, and I find it easier to store two smaller things on the wall than just one massive thing. So if you're planning on building one of those ultimate crosscut sleds, consider whether two smaller specialized ones might actually work better for you. That's what solved the problem for me. And I have plans for both of these on my website if you want them. I've been tempted by the computer numerical controlled machine, or the CNC, more than once. I've been watching YouTube videos of people cutting up plywood kitchen cabinet parts with integrated dowel holes, and I think, yeah, I want that. And then I remembered I don't actually want to build a kitchen, but the cool factor is very strong with the CNC. CNCs need permanent real estate, and like a lot of it, like at least 16 square feet of floor space. When I thought about my work, maybe making a coffee table and or like a desk per year, I realized that I didn't really need the repeatability of 100 identical parts. Now, if you're churning out cribbage boards for Etsy or doing production plywood cabinetry, that's a whole different ballgame. But for hobby furniture makers at home, it's a different story. Well, what about all that promised free time while the CNC is running? Well, for one-off furniture making, a lot of what you'd use a CNC for is cutting templates, which takes all of 5 minutes for a CNC to cut out. In some ways, that sounds pretty good. 5 minutes and you're done? Yeah, the actual cutting time might be 5 minutes, but before that, you gotta generate G-code files, you gotta mount the wood, zero out the machine, maybe run a test cut if you're not confident. Meanwhile, I could have printed out my design on regular printer paper, tape it all together, glue it to a piece of wood, cut it on the bandsaw, and smooth it out with some sandpaper by hand. I know it sounds like a lot, but I've done that for years, and it really doesn't take a whole lot much more time than all that prep work with the CNC does. Now, I'll admit the idea of the machine doing all the work while I can go do something else sounds pretty amazing. In my head, I'd be getting a whole lot of stuff done, but in reality, I'd probably just be like standing there watching it in an absolute panic of the bit breaking. And let's talk about the hidden costs. CNCs create some serious amount of sawdust, so you're gonna need a serious dust collector to take care of it. You probably want a dedicated computer for this setup. Maybe there are going to be software subscriptions too, and all the material you'll waste as you're learning along the way. And CNC skills just don't really cross over much to furniture making and vice versa. I mean, it's good to learn basic 3D computer drawing, but you're gonna have to be okay with spending time learning CAD and tool paths and G-code instead of joinery and wood movement. Both are valid woodworking. I'm not saying it's not, but they're just very different flavors. And if you're stuck at a computer for your day job all day, every day, do you really want more screen time when you get home before you can actually blow off steam out in your shop? Look, I get it. CNCs are definitely cool, but maybe ask yourself, do they actually solve a real problem in your shop? For me, making one-off furniture, a router with a pattern routing bit does 90% of the work for what I thought I needed a CNC for. Now, if you really want to get computer-aided work in your shop, something like A-Shape or Origin, to me, makes way more sense. I am not sponsored by them. I bought my own with my own money. It's handheld, it stores in a drawer or on a shelf, it doesn't need a G-code generator, you can make cuts on assembled pieces, and you can go from design to cutting in a matter of minutes. The Origin costs more than a lot of entry-level CNCs, but those cheap machines are gonna need a lot of assembly and calibration and troubleshooting and hours of software learning before you can actually make your first cut. And knowing my track record with my drill press and my 3 different machine standards, I'd probably end up spending a month learning how to do the tool paths and the G-code, make a couple templates, and then proceed to sell it on Facebook Marketplace for half of what I paid for it. Furniture makers survived for centuries without computers in the shop. That's what works for me. If you're in the same boat with one-off furniture, you might not need a CNC either. This might make people mad. I never once thought that I needed a traditional hand tool workbench. Look, I am not saying they're not super cool, because they are. I'm not saying that they don't have useful features, they totally do, but they're designed for a workflow that, and let's all be very honest with ourselves, 99% of us are not using. Sought-after benches like the Roubeau or the Nicholson were designed centuries ago by people who had to flatten boards and straighten edges purely by hand. They needed massive tops and extreme rigidity because hand planes put serious lateral pressure on a workbench. But I am not that special type of romantic. I am more than okay using machines to take out the grunt work so I can get back to what's really important. Watching people talk about building furniture on YouTube. What can happen when someone decides to build one of these beautiful monstrosities is that they tend to spend an inordinate amount of time planning it, and sometimes even months or years. I have read online that some people agonize over design details like barrel nuts versus drawboard Morrison tenons versus tusked tenons if they want to break it down, or they want to make those sweet dovetail tenons from the legs that go through the top on a Roubeau. Then you gotta buy the wood. That maple Roubeau that dreams are made out of, well, at this point in time, it's probably at least $1,200, if not $1,500 just for the lumber. And then add another $1,500 just for the bench crafted vise hardware that everyone wants to put on that bench. When you're staring at that amount of money that you could potentially screw up, the fear paralysis is a very real thing. And then when you finally build it, well, if this is your first time, then you'll be trying to make your dream bench on the floor, or best case scenario on sawhorses. Half a year of weekend shop time later, you got a 350-pound bench you might not be able to move by yourself, and it also might have some gappy joinery, and the top might also not really be that flat. I mean, I know my first laminated bench top looked more like a urinal trough. And to save money and effort and time, most Roubots that I've seen are only about 24 inches deep, which works well enough for edge jointing boards with a hand plane, but that's not so fantastic when you're trying to assemble a large built-in cabinet. I've seen a lot of people making plywood projects on a traditional joiner's workbench, projects that do not benefit from the robustness of a Roubo. And then they're having a really hard time because their big cabinet parts are falling off their too small workbench. These benches are really cool and they're designed for hand tool operations, but large assemblies need large assembly tables. And in a small shop, it's hard to justify having both. This is what's been working really well for me. A decently sized, decently stout workbench with a flat top that's at least 5 feet wide, mine is almost 6 feet wide, and 30 inches deep. I got work holding with a simple cast iron vise and a whole bunch of dog holes. A bench that doesn't cost a truckload of money or take all year to make. And bonus if there's a bunch of storage built in. Both workbenches in my shop fit this description. They're stiff enough for some light duty hand planing. I can chop with a chisel right on top of the leg and it feels pretty solid. I got multiple work holding options for modern power tools in any orientation. My main bench was more involved and expensive, but I made a budget-friendly version using home center construction lumber and no fancy tools for my Evergreen Workbench course. Dozens of people have built it, including absolute beginners who've never made a project before. People consistently mention how clear the instructions are and how they've applied those skills to other projects already. And right now I'm running a 30% off New Year's New Skills sale because if you're going to learn or level up your woodworking in 2026, start with a bench that won't break the budget. And if you want to watch the abridged YouTube video of me building the Evergreen Workbench, there is a link right here. If you want to watch that pocket screw video that I mentioned, that will be right here. And if you gleaned anything useful from today, then consider subscribing, liking the video, and give me some of that YouTube hype.